Serious. What's the creepiest thing you've experienced that no one else would believe? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I have a couple that I have told, but we will go with this one. My father calls me his godsend, like that movie where the kid dies but comes back. Well, he had a son before me who passed away from a fire. I should also include that I never met my dad's father and barely his mother. They were both heavy smokers and passed away. Well, I always feel like there is someone with me, like someone watching me or over me, but I'm superstitious and believe is that junk. One night, I was on the phone with my long-distance girlfriend. It was probably about 3 a.m. My dad was asleep, and no one else is there but us. I'm just laying there talking, but I get this really intense smell of cigarette smoke. No one smokes in my immediate family, but I had smelled it before in similar scenarios, so I didn't think anything of it. Although I was explaining that to my girlfriend, talking about how it kinda concerned me, well, about that time my phone goes silent, then to static, and I hear a deep, raspy voice say, "I'm not evil." Then silence for a minute. My heart was pounding, and my girlfriend is just talking away. So I asked if she hears that, and she was confused. I could never convince her about what happened, but I'm not insane. I will swear by this until the day I die. When I was a kid, I was riding my bike on some hills next to a bayou with my brother. I crashed at the bottom of one, and while trying to straighten my handlebars, a little girl with a German Shepherd was standing on the hill I had just come down and asked what we were doing there. We said just riding, and she said we shouldn't be there because the little girl was killed over there and pointed into the grass. We looked. She was gone. We ran to the top of the hill and there was nothing. It was about 75 yards of open space to the road and fence. Ghost or brilliant prank pulled off by someone that never took credit for it. There was this time I walked my dogs onto a beach somewhere around midnight and came across a strange object on the shore. It looked like an odd piece of large driftwood, but upon turning my flashlight on, I began to distinguish that it was the spine of something. No other bones nearby, just the spine. It looked very similar to a human spine, so I initially freaked out. The next day, it was gone. The tide probably took it. When I was 15, I was upstairs lying on my bed reading in mine and my sister's bedroom with my door opened only a crack. My brother was in his room with his door shut across the hall from mine. Then I hear loud, angry stomping coming up the wooden stairs, and I'm thinking, oh great, here comes Amanda having a tantrum. My 12-year-old sister would get into disagreements with my parents, and she had a huge temper. So I look up from my book and watch the door waiting for her to burst through. I hear the stomping come all the way down the hallway to our door, and my door fling open so hard that it hits the dresser next to it hard, but no one was there. It's all quiet. I can clearly see my brother's door is closed. I get up pretty freaked out, and I go in his room and ask him if he heard the stomping. He said no, he had earbuds in. I knew it wasn't him because the second my door flew open, I had a clear view of his bedroom door being shut. So I go downstairs and I see Amanda sitting on the couch with my parents. I ask if anyone heard the stomping in the hallway upstairs, and they said no. I told them what just happened, but of course they didn't believe me. That house had other weird things happen while we lived there, but this one was the absolute scariest. I grew up in this older house where an old man had died in the bathtub and his wife, who had dementia, left him in there for 2 weeks until the neighbors smelled his body. This was 2 owners before us. Tons of weird shit would happen there, from odd water dripping sounds to the light seemingly turning on or off in the bathroom by itself. But the scariest happened to my dad in the middle of one night, and my dad is a classic blue-collar type, no-nonsense guy who doesn't believe in this kind of shit. But anyways, the bathroom was right across from the door to the basement. My dad said he woke up and thought he heard me walking the hall, so he walked towards my room. When he got to my room, he heard footsteps coming up the basement steps. He says he could hear it very clearly. One step at a time, a slow but very measured pace, just like someone sneaking up the stairs. There was one of those rods you use to hang curtains or whatever sitting there, so he picked it up. He said he heard the last couple of steps. Then, the non-mistakable sound of a hand grab the doorknob. He says he remembered thinking, okay, here we go. If I can fight this person off, I'll be able to protect my family. If not, and then nothing. He gave it a few seconds and then grabbed the doorknob and threw it open. Nothing. He said he didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I have 2, one supernatural, one all too real. 1. I saw a shadow moving across the floor of a building I was working in. 2 issues with this shadow. The first is that it was a perfect circle in a brightly lit area with no discernible source. The second, it was about an inch thick coming off the floor. 2. This chick I served while working as a waiter started stalking, and no one believed it because she was supposedly the shy and reserved girl who had never said or done anything creepy. She would leave me notes on my car windshield written in some kind of anagram-like code. She showed up at my house when I was home, claiming to be my friend and saying I had asked her to pick something up for me. My mother's mom since blared a effing foghorn at that because I never asked friends for anything. That finally ended when one of my coworkers witnessed her digging through a trash can out back after I'd thrown my lunch away and tossed the to-go box into the can. And yes, she ate my leftovers out of the trash. Scary part is, when I tried to get a restraining order the first time, the male judge asked me why I didn't just return her affection since she was clearly interested. Second judge, a woman, granted me a 500-foot restraining order. When I was in 8th grade, I lived in downtown Jacksonville for a few months attending online school. I always had a weird feeling in our place, but I dismissed it because we lived in a pretty safe neighborhood. One night, I had a really weird dream about how this Middle Eastern man in his mid-20s approaching me and telling me that my family was in danger and that I needed to leave. Since it was a dream, it was a little hard to focus, so he kept repeating himself, but each time he was getting increasingly louder until all he was screaming was for me to wake up. My eyes jolted open, and when I went to sit up, I immediately froze because towering over me was this filthy old man in his 50s or 60s watching me with a blank expression. I knew that part wasn't a dream because we were like that for a while until he kind of disappeared and then materialized in my doorway still watching me. I looked away for a second to turn on my lamp, but when I looked back he was gone. I slept in either mom's bed or the couch after that, LOL. No one else believes me outside of the 3 other people that were there. 2 stories, same group of people each time. 1. We went to a local graveyard around midnight because, edgy teens, and do the whole bit with a voice recorder. On the walk back to the car, my shoulders kept burning, but I shrugged it off. Anyway, in the car, we hooked the recorder up to the aux and drive down to the train station while listening to the recording. At one point, I had said, "Do you want us to leave you alone?" And there was a reply as loud as day saying, "Yes, mother." I don't know. We all freak out a little because who doesn't like to be scared? As we're giggling and squealing with spooky delight, I pull into the train station. By now, both of my shoulders were absolutely on fire. I've burnt myself with hair bleach, and the sensation was like that. I shrug off my jacket and ask everyone if I'd been bitten by some bugs or something. They get quiet for a moment before someone in the back seat says, "Dude, pasta, you have handprints on your shoulders." This was around when the first iPhones came out, so someone snapped the picture, that I've since lost to the ages, of course, and you could clearly see the outline of hand on either shoulder, palms on the bottom by my shoulder blade, thumbs pointing to my spine, 4 fingers wrapping over my shoulders. 10 out of 10, super creepy. We were also attacked by a lone bat that night, and I accidentally scared the piss out of everyone with my car. All in all, good night. 2. I put this story on Reddit before, so it might be familiar. Same group of people as I've said above. We were driving out in the middle of the desert at midnight because we were stupid, taking dirt roads and just talking shit. Anyway, a friend of mine says she has to pee, but had never peed out in the middle of nowhere. I had a vague idea of where we were since my dad liked random dirt road trips too, and we had been to this area before. So I drive us toward an outhouse. It's literally a cinder block building with a toilet over a deep concrete-lined hole. As we drive up to the area, which is sort of like a dirt cul-de-sac surrounded by large boulders and grass, I see the outhouse, but I also see a guy sitting on the rocks near it. Here are the facts. It's midnight, in the middle of the desert. There are no other cars in this parking area. The guy was in a suit. I pull forward more, slowly starting my turn because we were all a little creeped out when this guy gets up and disappears into the bush and beyond my headlights. We were still wrestling with whether or not we want to stop. We had 2 very large, beefy guys stuffed in my car, so we felt we'd be okay if this was a homeless desert squatter or something, when the guy shows back up, just standing in my lights watching our car. Then, a few more guys in suits pop out of the bush. They're all carrying some sort of larger rifle. Nope, Nope. I hit the gas, turned hard, probably sprayed them with rocks and dust, and took off. We drove for 30 minutes, all dead quiet, until my friend broke the silence and said she still had to pee. She learned to pee off the side of the road that day, and years later, I learned there is supposedly a Scientology center camp thing out in this desert. I used to live in a really old house that had an upstairs. My sister used to sleep upstairs and I would sleep downstairs, and I could always tell when she was up there because I could hear her footsteps loudly. Anyway, one night I was laying in bed and I heard someone walking around up there continuously for about 10 seconds. It creeped me out because my mom and sister were both downstairs in the living room and we were the only ones who lived there. I even walked to the living room to make sure they were actually downstairs, and they were. They thought I just heard the house expanding or something, but I know what that sounds like, and this was clear footsteps walking. I used to live in a haunted house, and I only realized there was something wrong going on there after I moved. These are some incidents that happened there. The first happened when I was about 12 and was reading creepypastas on my computer. Hard to believe, I know. I remember thinking I would literally die if something like this happened to me. About the living room, the couch is in front of the hallway, and there's a door leading to the basement in there. So, when you're at the couch, the hallway is behind you and you're facing the TV. If there's enough interest, I might draw something to explain it better. Well, I hear someone opening the front door, walking beside me, and opening the basement door. I don't think too much about it, as I used to live with my 3 brothers, my parents, and my grandma, and the house was pretty noisy. After a couple minutes later, it hit me. I was home alone. My mom was at a park with my brothers, and my father was working. The front door that I previously locked was open, and the basement door too. I asked, "Is anyone there?" Yes, this is how every movie character dies. I just couldn't resist it. Now I get why they do it. No one answered. I didn't have the guts to go to the basement, so I quietly waited for my family to arrive. I didn't mention this incident until we moved. When I told this to my mom, she froze. She told me that when she came home from school one day, she saw someone through the curtains where the kitchen was. She was outside, if I wasn't clear enough. She supposed that it was my grandma cooking and opened the door super excitedly because, well, my grandma's a great cook. The kitchen was empty. My grandma came downstairs after hearing my mom and proceeded to apologize. She was showering upstairs. Grandma also refused to sleep in the basement, her room. She once saw the shadow of someone hanging there, and since that day she slept on the couch. We moved not long after. After we moved, we found out that an elderly couple died in there, a few months apart from each other. This is the worst type of scary to me, because this isn't a big old house in the middle of the woods. It's a small house with many apartments around it, and it even shares a wall with the neighbor. There's a big road in front of it and everything. Again, I'm sorry for my English. I hope it's understandable. Very great job. When I was around 12 years old, my younger brothers and I at our mom and stepdad's house for the weekend. They set up tents and as had us camp in the backyard overnight. We had a fire going, had water gun fights, lit off fireworks. Everything was pretty fun. The backyard was up against some woods with a stream and a couple old abandoned houses completely covered in vines and brush further back. We were digging around the stream and found a horseshoe with the number 666 on it. Of course, being young, we were all freaked out, but the adults just brushed it off and thought it was funny. Eventually, we all settled down and were asleep in our tents. I woke up having to pee, so went to the fire pit that at this point was just embers and started to pee next to it. Right then, I realized that there's a dark figure standing right next to me. I froze and stared straight ahead, trying not to look at it. He asked in a deep voice if I have something for him. I finally turn and bolt to my mom and stepdad's tent, forcing out a scream. My stepdad pops up and runs out to see what's going on but finds nothing. They decide I must have had a nightmare. Maybe I did. Maybe I saw a demon. Maybe it was some homeless guy that stayed back in those abandoned houses. Whatever it was, I still get creeped out thinking about that night. I was at a club in Los Angeles and suddenly was stricken with absolute terror. I started shaking and my fight-flight feint kicked into high gear. I found the people I came with and told them I needed to leave immediately. 2 minutes down the road, we got nailed by a drunk driver and our car flipped over and landed in the ditch upside down. None of the first responders thought there would be a single survivor, but we were all totally unscathed. The man who hit us was named Booze. Yes, that's the most unbelievable part of the story, and we were told he would not make it, but I have never verified if he died. In short, this is why I have a really difficult time with the concept that we have any control over our lives. That awful thing I felt would happen wouldn't have happened if we stayed at the club. When my son was about 3, he was having trouble falling asleep, so I let him into our bed to look at his books, hoping that would make him sleepy. My husband was asleep and I was reading a book. My son starts reading his book aloud. It was a new book I hadn't read to him yet, and he was 3. He couldn't read. I asked him how he knew the words, and he said, "John is telling me." "Who the hell is John?" "The boy that lives in my closet." Holy shit. Freaked me out. Over the next year, he would mention John occasionally. There were a few weird things that happened that I witnessed, like blinds rattling when no windows were open. It eventually stopped, but my son, now 15, refuses to go into his old nursery. He doesn't remember John, but that room creeps him out. We use it for storage now. Honestly, I don't like going in there either. Back when I was in middle school one night, I was having a really bad time. I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling like I was going to throw up, but at the same time, like my throat was too clogged for it to happen. Headache, lightheadedness, the whole 9 yards. Being a wanting to please kid, I spent the night worrying about what my mom was going to think if I asked to stay home from school the next day. Morning rolls around, and mom comes into my room to wake me up, but instead of shaking my shoulder and telling me to get out of bed like she always did, she sort of waves by the doorway until I noticed her, and then said, "Do you need a sick day?" I nodded, croaked out a "yeah," and instantly fell asleep. I found out later that she did that because I came to her in a dream that night crying and asking her if I could stay home from school. From that day on, we could never forget about that. This one is going to sound boring next to everything else because it's not supernatural or anything. Anyway, was out camping in the Eastern Sierras with my dad and wife. One night, my dad and I were laying in a clearing at night just looking up at the Milky Way and watching the occasional satellite pass by, when one fairly bright star disappeared for a second, then reappeared, and then disappeared again, and didn't reappear. After about 30 seconds, I asked my dad, "Did you see that?" He said, "Yeah." And we both just laid there looking up at the sky for a while, not knowing what to say. Might be pretty tame to some people, but I've never seen anything in the stars change in any manner while watching it. I'd also be willing to accept that I may have been seeing something that didn't happen, but the fact that someone else saw too kind of freaked me out. My dad is a pretty avid outdoorsman and does a lot of backpacking or camping. He also worked as an optical engineer designing lenses for telescopes and spacecraft for 30 plus years, retired now. He's seen just about everything you can see while camping, and also happens to know about pretty much any stellar phenomenon you could possibly see. So, the fact that he has seen it too, and had no explanation, and was a bit unsettled by it, didn't help. But the Earth didn't fall out of orbit or anything, so guess it's okay.